I like that, so I'm going to go ahead and add to the cart. I get to the checkout, and then it's $20 extra in the duties and taxes and fees. And now I'm having to reevaluate, is this $40 sweater really worth $60?
Welcome to the Decoding Cross-Border E-Commerce podcast by Zonos. Aaron, today we have a couple of guests that we're excited to talk about a subject we really wanted to hit on a few episodes back and needed to reschedule, and that is inclusive pricing of duty and tax during the shopping experience, and how do you do that? And we have lots of questions around that. And so today we have with us Kylie Williams. You can say hello.
Hi.
All right. And then Chanel Barnes.
Hello.
And Chanel's been here before talking about everything HS codes. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at Zonos real quick before we dive into inclusive pricing?
I'm Kylie Williams. I'm part of the product team here at Zonos. Started out building inclusive pricing last year as product manager, and I've moved over to product marketing since then. So still heavily involved in inclusive pricing.
I'm Chanel Barnes. I'm a product manager here at Zonos. I kind of own all products related to the item experience. So as Clint said, I own Classify, our catalog product, Restrict, and inclusive pricing. So I've worked closely with Kylie over the last 6-8 months to kind of hand off inclusive pricing, and it's been a really awesome product to see come to life. So happy to be here.
So
yeah, I'm here too, Clint.
Oh yeah, Aaron, welcome.
Yeah.
Hey, we tasked Kylie though with the joke. I know you know.
I'm excited. In fact,
we're usually relying on you, but
I'm really excited. We have the agenda that was lined out that Kylie put together, and there's this big black line through her joke. So I haven't heard it yet.
We're ready.
Okay. Why did the shopper break up with their online cart?
Why did the shopper break up with him? Why is that?
It was just too taxing.
That was actually pretty good. Well, we got to bring you back. Okay. Well, this is going to be fun. Should we just start off with the basic question?
I mean, what? Yeah, I think so. I think it works. Like, what is inclusive pricing?
I can take that. Inclusive pricing is a strategy that builds all extra costs of a product into the total price up front. So rather than surprising shoppers at time of checkout with additional fees and taxes and duties and shipping, all of that is baked in. So the moment that a shopper arrives on a merchant's website, sees the total product price, so there aren't any surprises at checkout.
Why would you do that?
To increase transparency for shoppers. Shoppers don't want to be surprised. No one wants to be surprised when you're shopping on a website. So if you go on a website and let's say there's a shirt for $40, a lot of shoppers in this world, depending on the country, would expect at time of checkout, they're going to be paying $40 rather than paying $40 plus maybe $20 in additional fees and duties and taxes. So it just increases transparency for shoppers.
So, as an American, I'm used to having sales tax added at the checkout. So, that's normal for me. Isn't that the way it should be for everybody?
We think that because it's normal for us. It's an interesting concept when you really think about inclusive pricing. We can take the EU, for example. The EU expects to see taxes built into their product price. They likely, a lot of them don't even know that there are taxes included because that's just the norm for them. And on the contrary, the norm for us in America is we expect to see those taxes at checkout. We don't even think about it. We pay $30 for a t-shirt. You may end up paying an extra $10-15 at checkout, but we think we paid $30 for a t-shirt. Whereas in the EU and the UK, they want to see that. They're used to and accustomed to seeing that total price up front. So it's really just different cultural expectations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, really, this is just an extension of, or just a form of localization when it comes to localizing your site, whether it be their currency, language, etc. Pricing the products the way they expect them to be priced, I imagine has to have a huge impact on conversion as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just a fact of life for us here in the U.S., so we just kind of dismiss it. We don't expect it to be part of the product price at all. But if I was shopping in France and going to a local store, then I would have those taxes built into the product price already. And so if I'm shopping online, I expect the same thing. And when I see them separately in the checkout, then I already thought that was built into the product price, and it's a lot harder for me to swallow that pill.
Well, we've talked before that there's three areas. Like, well, you can be surprised at two different steps of the journey, right? You can be surprised either when the package gets there and they ask for the duties and taxes, or next step, you can surprise them at checkout. Which, depending on where you're at, you may or may not be surprised, right? Like Aaron's not surprised.
Nope.
You know, he was expecting the tax and is still upset at the Wayfair law that he has to pay, sales tax on Amazon.
Hey, but I'm really good at math now because I have to do the math in my head to add the tax to the $30, or I just tell myself I got a better deal than I really got.
Yeah, that's what most people do.
Yeah.
And then now our third option, right, which is to just totally eliminate the surprise. You arrive at the website, but you do want to be strategic, it sounds like, because it can be country dependent. But before, I actually want to get into that. Before we do, what are the consequences then of kind of like a DDU experience of showing the duties and taxes at checkout, and what's to a region where, let's say that they're used to seeing the duties and taxes included?
Yeah. So if you wait until the checkout to show those costs you're talking about, but then if I'm in a country that expects it to be already included,
yeah. So what's the downfall of that? Because I'm a merchant, I'm like, look, I don't want to worry about this. I'm just going to put it at checkout. Yeah.
So let's say I'm shopping online and I'm in a country that expects that. So I see that $40 sweater and I think, okay, yeah, I like that sweater. I'm going to go ahead and add it to the cart. I get to the checkout and then it's $20 extra in the duties and taxes and fees. And now I'm having to reevaluate, is this $40 sweater really worth $60? And it's already in my mind, it's valued at $40 now. So it's just kind of throwing away that extra $20. And I have that critical piece of that buyer journey. I'm now reevaluating if I want to continue. Whereas if those costs weren't there, if they were built into the product price, then I would just have a simple click to continue.
This reminds me of experiences I think we've all had at one point in time where it's like, oh, this is exciting. And then you get to the checkout and all of a sudden, oh, shipping costs are really high. Now I'm rethinking if I even want to go through and check out, right?
The Airbnb thing with all the extra fees.
Oh, yes.
The cleaning fees and everything. You think it's a great deal, and then you get to the checkout and
I was going to say Airbnb or like concerts are maybe more reasonable.
That's a racket,
examples.
by the way. The whole concert thing. I just don't understand. The convenience fees, they charge me more to make it more convenient for them. I don't understand.
See, the way you don't understand is the same way a lot of shoppers don't understand when they're surprised at checkout. You just don't expect it. And so when maybe in the US, again, Airbnb or concert, you go, by the time you get to checkout, your price is almost doubled. And you have just major cart abandonment and drop off because they're surprised and no one wants to be surprised.
You know, it's funny you bring up the concert thing. I was looking at it and I'm trying to remember which ticket site it was. It might have been StubHub or it doesn't matter. But I had the option to just show everything included in the price. So I didn't have to wait to see what the fees were going to be at the end. And it was so much easier to shop because I knew exactly what the price was going to be. At that point, I didn't really care how much of it was the ticket versus how much was the actual fees. I just wanted to know how much I was going to pay.
Well, hey, and to give Airbnb a break here, they have enabled some of those types of features. So,
but do you know what they add on at the end? Taxes. I was just looking at it over the weekend. Yeah, they can include all the fees and then excluding taxes.
Yeah,
you have to wait till checkout for that.
Man, if I could be king for a day, what would I change? That would be one. Just include it, right? I would prefer that. And so, what regions, maybe that have had kings, what regions would like to have their duties and taxes displayed, at least the VAT, right, or tax displayed in the product price? Like where are the regions that merchants should be thinking about doing some type of an inclusive price?
Yeah, the most common that we hear is the EU and the UK. That's, again, where that shopper expectation is really strong. I think there's about 80 countries or so that expect taxes to be in product prices locally. But those are the ones that we hear the most about. And the EU has consumer laws that you have to abide by, even if you're shipping cross-border as well. And those dictate that you have to be upfront about these costs and show them at the beginning of the purchase process.
So if I have the ability to just do inclusive pricing around the globe, you're saying only do it in the countries where that's what they're expecting.
Yeah, it gets tricky. So if you have, if you sell the same types of products as other competitors, if you have the same vendor, then you have to be careful about that competitive advantage of at least even getting somebody to add your product to the cart to see that you have all those costs built in. So you have to be aware of that. So in some cases, it can make sense in those countries where they expect it to be separate to keep it out. But then the exception to that would be if you have exclusive goods or high-end luxury goods. Then you don't have to worry about that so much, and you can focus on building a really great customer experience, because even if they do expect to have those as extra costs, if they get to the checkout and they aren't, that's just going to build up your brand, as long as, again, you aren't having to worry about keeping things competitive with other people.
Is there any legal requirements out there for including the total price, whether you're in that region or not, or...
Yes. So Japan, 3 years ago, I think in April 2021, they passed a mandate where you have to show the product price as the inclusive product price from the very beginning. So that product price should be inclusive of all the fees that you'd experience through that purchase. And it can be broken out if you want to separately, but the actual main price has to be that inclusive one.
It used to be optional in Japan. Is that the one that was optional? I know where like some would present it one way, other merchants would present it other. And I'm assuming that's really more local businesses selling down the street. You're going to the convenience store to buy something. And that'd be kind of a weird experience to have to try to understand, is it included or is it not?
Right.
And so it sounds like they just standardized it and said, no, the best approach is just...
Yeah. I think I saw about like 20 years ago, it was kind of optional. And then in 2021, I believe it was mandated. I think there's still some, I don't know, about how much leniency there is. I know that there's articles about how they're still kind of rolling it out, making sure that people are abiding by it. But it's been several years, so it is the expectation there.
Of the countries that are not expecting the inclusive price, right? They're used to exclusive outside the U.S. What are some other areas that, off the top of your head, that are probably expecting it to be seen at checkout?
Oh man, I'm focusing so much on the ones that do want it to be.
Okay, then I'll reframe the question this way: how many countries do you typically recommend? Because I think you guys had done an analysis on which countries we should show an inclusive price to, and how many countries and regions did that end up being at?
It was about 80 countries, a little under 80 countries. So the EU and UK, like Kylie said, make up a lot of those, and then Australia and New Zealand, Japan. The rest are more a little bit like trickled throughout, but the EU and UK are the largest
Although
markets.
Australia has a high de minimis as well, so even though it does expect taxes to be included, if you have like a lower product price, then you may not need it.
If you're a smaller merchant, that's under the threshold though, right, of 75,000 a year. If you're a larger merchant, you're going to be paying tax on everything. Yep. True. Okay.
I think Canada's one where they're like us, and they expect it at checkout. So I know we're talking a lot about tax, and that is for the local buying experience. You go to the store, tax is included, but actually there was duty paid on goods that were imported as well. That's just part of the product cost before it even got to that retailer. But on a cross-border transaction, that now becomes a very relevant part of the journey as well, right? And a new element, an element for retailers that they have to consider. It's not just tax anymore. It's like, okay, when I send this to somebody in another country, there may be duty and maybe some import fees applicable. So do you just add those at checkout then? Is that you kind of have tax inclusive, and then just any duties and fees that might be applicable, just add that at the checkout?
Yeah, you can. Tax inclusive is the most common. So depending on the pricing strategy, you can, and it's also a lot easier to include taxes in your product prices and apply duty or calculate for duties and taxes at time of checkout, because the duties are going to vary based on the product. Whereas typically the tax is going to be a little more flat. So it can be a little bit easier to make those like calculations or update those prices. But the duties can really vary. So you'll see a lot of merchants that'll do it at time of checkout, so they can run those calculations at that time, because it's going to vary from one product to the next.
Well, I think one of the challenges with duties is it's not just the duty can change by product, which does make it more complicated and the calculation, right? Depending on what if it's a volumetric, calculation of duty or whatever. But it's also the fact that there's a duty de minimis, right? And so that one product, if someone bought one of it, they may not have any duty. The moment that they buy two, now they have duty. So how much do you build in the product price? I mean, is this a problem that you guys kind of work through? Like, how do you manage inclusive pricing when you have de minimis values at play?
Yes, that was definitely a problem that we worked through. It's really hard to tell because you don't know when you have a shopper visit a site, you don't know whether or not they're going to hit that de minimis. So you really have to, there's a lot of calculations or things you need to take into consideration, such as the average cart value to kind of determine whether or not it would be in your best strategy to include duties further upstream in an inclusive price or calculate them at time of checkout.
Yeah, you're taking a calculation that's done at the cart level, and the de minimis is based off of the cart value, and you're trying to predict that and move it upstream into the product. And so it does need to use some of those averages to see whether or not inclusive pricing is even a good strategy in that area.
I mean, that's really similar to what people do with free shipping policies, right?
Exactly.
Shipping's based on the order, and if you want to offer free shipping, you're just figuring out a way to account for those costs in your product prices somehow.
It's exactly the same principle, yeah. And it's all about that conversion in the checkout, not being that extra cost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I would argue that, I mean, that works well for like apparel maybe, right? But when you have different size items, like we have a family e-commerce website, and there was an order for a very large item that is not standard. Usually it fits in smaller stuff. And I had put in place free shipping over a certain dollar amount, free 2-day shipping. And then my son called me. He's like, "Why'd you do that? We just lost money on this shipment." And so it's now you got to increase the product price, possibly even more, right? So that's it's a lot of work to manage this at a, in an automated way, right? Like it's a lot of work, which I think we'll talk about in a minute. What are some other things or experiences that you think about when you think about inclusive pricing and how to improve that shopper's experience that kind of dovetails or fits well with inclusive pricing?
Anytime you're changing the product price, you can try to bring in other types of strategies around that. So if you're building in duties and taxes into the product price, that's changing what that cost is. And it could end up in, instead of $12, $12 or $14.63, something strange like that. And there's actually a lot of studies done around psychological pricing, charm pricing, vanity pricing.
Pricing, that's the one I'm...
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where charm... All of a sudden, someone brought up charm pricing, a while back, and everybody loved it. And I just think about Lucky Charms, and I don't know.
You like Lucky Charms, though, right?
I do.
Well, maybe charm pricing is the right term then.
There you go.
It has more of a positive thing versus vanity. There's, being vain sounds a little
that's true.
Negative, right? So charm pricing it is. That's a new term.
Oh, okay. All right.
They can be referring to different things as well, but with charm pricing, it's typically things, ending in 0.9 or 0.95, trying to incentivize you in your brain to think that you're getting a good deal with things. But it's really beneficial in countries where they culturally try to, get good bargains and things like that. But in other areas, then it can actually be detrimental because it can feel manipulative to those people. They feel like you're trying to manipulate them into getting this deal. So they like things ending in 0 instead. And there's different cultures around the world that typically prefer one or the other, fall into those two different buckets there. But then you also have some countries that are really interesting, like Japan and China, that have connotations to the numbers. So they have different meanings. So I think in China, the word for 8 in Chinese is similar to the word for luck. So they like to end in things, they like prices ending in 8. It'll actually increase conversion for them too. And then in Japan, it's also 8. It has a happy connotation, but the number's 9, which is what, here in the US, we really like. That number has a negative connotation because it sounds similar to the Japanese word for suffering and agony. So it actually can decrease.
So it's kind of like elevators not having a 13th floor, right? Same kind of psychological.
Oh, I guess. Well, I know I don't price anything at $666.
You know, that's a wise choice. Very wise.
I heard that Chinese, they don't like 4 either because it's associated with death. And so they'll
Yes.
skip the number 4.
Yep,
whenever they can.
It's like the verb to die, so they don't like the ending in 4 either.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are the two different, like Kylie was mentioning, to differentiate the two. You have charm pricing that can take a lot of these connotations into consideration, and then you have more simple rounding, which is really important at a minimum to take into consideration when thinking about inclusive pricing, because when you're making predictions or calculating based on product prices further upstream, it's going to end, like Kylie said, in random numbers.
So rounding to 0 or even rounding
Yeah.
to like 99.
Right,
Yeah.
at a minimum.
But we're also talking inclusive pricing works extremely well with currency conversion. So now you're talking doing
Yes.
some calculation, and then you're converting it into another currency, and then presenting it in a way that that's going to make them feel comfortable buying, right? So
Right.
you got to
Yeah.
avoid certain numbers, like the number 9, or in China the number 4, right? Because that means death or
Right.
something like that, right?
And then also just random prices.
Yeah.
You have a bunch of shirts. Some are, $20 and 63 cents, $21.46.
Yeah.
I can keep
Especially
going.
after the currency conversion, right?
Yeah.
That's the-
Exactly.
and but some merchants will do inclusive pricing in, well, they'll keep it in the local currency. You can do that.
Mhm.
You could keep it in US dollars, for instance, and
Yep.
still
Yep, you
know.
can. And if you don't have the resources or you're trying to avoid just these rounding
Yep.
issues, you can do that.
This is where currency conversion actually kind of complicates it, because currency conversion is great, but without that final step of, beautifying it or charming it or whatever, it makes it, you may actually end up hurting conversion in a way with the currency conversion. So there's a lot of factors, I think, to take into account of where you're at, what platform you're on, what capabilities there are. But I think at a minimum, being able to figure out a way to those important countries get an inclusive prices, it's definitely going to help with your sales and conversion.
Yeah. And you might not think that it's, going to make that big of a difference to have this kind of psychological pricing. But there's been studies done as well where they've had the same product be listed. I think it was a women's clothing item in the study that I'm thinking of. And they had it priced at $34. I think it was $39 and $44. And this was to the US, where ending in 9 is kind of a better tactic. And the one that priced at $39 actually outperformed even the cheaper option. So there is a lot to be said for the way that you end the prices as well, even though it seems like a simpler or trivial thing.
So, okay. Now you guys have built something that does this, and I would like to hear, we don't talk a lot about Zonos, but I think that even the methods, right? You can kind of educate on how it works, right? Like, how do you actually get this to work at scale with de minimis values in play, with currency and all of that? And maybe start with Shopify. I mean, I know we have this capability on Shopify that's, love to hear. All right, you already built this.
Already built it, and it was not easy. And it's available right now directly in Shopify. And the way that we built it was really difficult because we had to take a lot of different things into consideration. And as we talked to a lot of different merchants about inclusive pricing, they all kind of needed different things. Like we talked about earlier, some only want to include tax, some want to include duties too, some want to include fees. So there are a lot of those variables. Some wanted rounding. And so we really needed to build a robust solution that could accommodate all of these different use cases. So what we do, and we run calculations further upstream. So there are a lot of inclusive pricing solutions or workarounds that you may just tack on 20% to try to accommodate for some of those. We actually perform our landed cost calculations at the product specific level and at the country specific level to determine what those inclusive prices should be. So we get that done further upstream, and this gives merchants the option to choose what they want to include. So whether they want to just include duties and taxes, taxes and fees, they can do all of that during setup so that we can really get granular based on a merchant strategy.
So it's not as simple as, hey, I'm just going to run this one product price. What's the duty? What's the VAT? It's the entire amount of the cart, right? And so you're looking at times whether it's historical, which we can do, or we're monitoring it, right? And how often do we rerun calculations to ensure that the prices are, just up to date and accurate? Because there's changes in the tariff schedule, and this is a big load, right? I mean, this is not a small task to go through an entire catalog.
Yeah, it's a lot of calculations, and there are a lot of those variables that go in. We don't have a set time of when we rerun, but when a country's tariff schedule changes or when tax rates change, then we'll dynamically rerun those calculations.
Or when the price of the product changes.
Or that.
Yeah.
Or the
Right.
product changes.
We're
Yep,
based
correct.
off of triggers, rather than like a specific time frame.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So really what you're doing is there's a lot of pre-work being done. You got to know the HS code. And we use Classify to do that. And then you understand all the different landed cost elements. And then you have to understand the profile of their orders to then bake a cake for an inclusive price, right?
Yep.
And we have to be that calculated at it because aren't we guaranteeing the inclusive price amount as well?
Yeah, we are. That's one of the reasons that these calculations are so important.
Yeah, and it can get more complicated too because you often have VAT or tax on shipping costs, and that shipping cost isn't known yet either. So you have to do a lot of that pre-work to understand what the average shipping cost is and how you distribute that
Wow.
per orders or per product.
Normally when merchants have to do this on their own, whether it be a free shipping policy or anything, they're just rolling with the punches, and sometimes they're going to lose, sometimes they're going to win. But in the end, they're taking on a lot of risk, and their margins are going to fluctuate a lot. But when we're talking about guaranteeing the landed cost calculations, that means the merchant can have and they know what their margin is going to be. They know how much they're going to sell the product for. And now Zonos is on the hook for making sure those inclusive pricing amounts are accurate.
Yes, and not just accurate, but really the best they can be. We really hone into what that inclusive price should be instead of doing just a blanket percentage higher so that we can cover ourselves. We do want to make sure that we cover ourselves, but we also want to make sure that product price is still competitive.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to run those actual calculations is really a big advantage.
This is the problem with averages, is if you just try to do averages, you will end up raising your price so much that you can outprice yourself because there's you don't want to lose money on that one item. And so you're like, let's just up the averages and I just make sure I'm totally covered. And that's when conversion will start taking a hit, which is, I think, what the great thing and the amount of time that we put into the inclusive pricing project is the mass amount of landed cost calculations, shipping calculations, historical, going forward, item specific to arrive at the right, kind of correct amount per item to mark up and then, properly display it, right? Whether it's rounded or whatever, it was a feat, but it's really awesome because you don't have to worry about getting too high on a certain item or losing on a different one because I'll just play the law of averages. And I remember talking to a merchant a long time ago, and this shipping example applies to duty and tax. So, for listeners, I think they'll understand, in e-commerce, this merchant was selling really expensive watches, and they were selling coolers, and all their shipping prices, and this was a massive retailer, were based on the value of the product. So let's say it was to ship 10%, let's say, to ship a watch, how much did that cost? Right? Hundreds of dollars a watch, like $300 watch, it cost way too much. So no one bought watches from the retailer. So where'd they go? They went to their competitor. Guess what customers loved buying from them? The coolers. Man, they love buying those coolers. And this is that same principle. So you got to be super careful with duty and tax inclusive, because you may end up, if you just do some type of just general average, hurting conversion on a certain item that you actually have margin on, because the problem is it's priced too high. They can go somewhere else and get that item. And they come back to you for the ones that, you're like, well, I'm just doing the laws of averages. And now that you're getting orders you don't want.
Yeah, and that's why the customization at the merchant level is so important. And the order history that we factor into our calculations is so important because it's going to vary so much from one merchant to the next merchant. And additionally, another feature that we have with inclusive pricing is the ability to make adjustments so that you can monitor after utilizing inclusive pricing, you can monitor at the country level how some of your products are doing, how they're selling to one country compared to the next country. And if the duty rate's really hurting you in one country, you can subsidize that by like 20% and see how that can impact your conversion and make those alterations at the country level.
Yeah, no, I love that targeted approach. And this has been super insightful about inclusive pricing. I think in general, just educating the audience on why it's important, and giving them some guidance on if you want to take this approach, like what to take into account. And I think we hit on all those points. So it's been great having both of you on.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.